Have you ever felt that you were faced with such a challenge that you couldn't overcome that challenge? Or possibly you felt like that what is in front of you is so massive and so large that you cannot overcome that? Well, we've all been there before, and no doubt about it, people in our country and our faith's past have also been there. Faith Friday number 7 will discuss how we as Americans and believers should rise to the challenge that is before us each day, and in rising to that challenge, be encouraged that we will overcome and be victorious in the end.
Welcome to Front Porch Politics, conservative conversation for a complicated country. And now, your host, the pontificator of common sense and coffee connoisseur, David Marks.
And thank you, Dr. Harrison, for that warm introduction. I am David Marks, the pontificator of common sense and your coffee connoisseur, coming to you once again from Front Porch Politics podcast on this Faith Friday. I hope you folks have had a great week. I hope that you've been able to check out all of the new adjustments and the upgrades that we've made to our website, and we'd like your feedback. So be sure that you send us an email or you send us a message on our social media pages and just let us know. Now to the podcast at hand. Faith Friday is one of those times that I really get to enjoy that time with you, the podcast listeners. It gives me the ability to set politics aside for a moment, even though that's what we want to discuss, and to actually discuss how we can encourage you in your home, in your family, in your faith, and as a citizen of our country, how we can all work towards making this country a better place. So Faith Friday is just something very special to me. It's more of an opinion than it is maybe sometimes the political side where we talk about the news articles. But in the opening, I told you to be encouraged. Be encouraged to rise to the challenge that's before you. It doesn't matter if it's small in my eyes or if it's large in my eyes. Every one of us face challenges each day. The challenge that you face may be monumental compared to the challenge that I'm facing, or the challenge that I'm facing may be monumental compared to the challenge that you're facing. Irregardless, we're all facing challenges, and those challenges that we have, we can make the decision which way we go. We can either decide to give up and to lay down and to quit, or we can decide that we're going to man up or woman up, and that we're going to face that challenge head on, and we're going to take on whatever it may be. So, in doing some research for this podcast and doing a little bit of reading, two things just kept popping across. Two people, actually, kept coming across my mind. One biblical, one historical to America. So, no surprise there that I'm going to pull an American context into this. The first person that comes to my mind is King David. And for many of you know, I share the namesake of this person, and of course, I've always loved the story of David and Goliath. Goliath was an enemy of Israel. He was an enemy of God's people. Goliath, of course, was a brute, and many people feared Goliath, including God's people. As a matter of fact, and I'm paraphrasing, God's people did not want to fight Goliath when he challenged them. This small shepherd boy, this young small shepherd boy, comes out of the wilderness and challenges Goliath. And of course, most of you know the story. David charged towards Goliath, and through the mightiness of God, he slew Goliath. And of course, they won the battle that day. What most people overlook, though, is what took place before David ever went and he faced Goliath. David did not just pick up one rock. He picked up 5 smooth stones from a brook. Now, I know a lot of you are thinking, well, maybe he was afraid he would miss, or some people would even say, well, if he had that much faith in God, why did he pick up 5? Why didn't he just pick up 1? If he felt like God was going to give him the battle, he should have just picked up 1 stone. See, we're looking at this from a different perspective than David was. It wasn't the fact that David's faith was weak, because there's no doubt about it that if David's faith was weak, he would have never charged towards Goliath. He would have ran just like everyone else. David picked up 5 stones because Goliath had 4 brothers. David went into that challenge. David went into that battle prepared just in case Goliath's 4 brothers showed up to the fight. That's what I want you to do as an American and as a believer. I want to encourage you to not only challenge yourself, to be encouraged and to charge that fight head on, but when you do so, be prepared. I have never thought it to be unwise that any decision you make, any challenge you face, no matter what it may be, that you always do so with wisdom and preparation. Always make sure you prepare for what's coming ahead. Look at all the obstacles. Look at every option you may have. Look at everything that can go right and everything that can go wrong, and try to make the best decision, prayerfully, that you can. David did that because he knew that even if all 4 of Goliath's brothers showed up, God's ability, with David's willingness to be led and to follow God's will, all 5 of those would die that day. And as a matter of fact, all 4 of Goliath's brothers either died by David's hand or by the household of David. So no doubt they basically got what was coming to them in the end. This second story of inspiration that I want to give you is from one of my favorite historical characters to our country, if not my favorite of all time. I mean, when we look at the different people we've had in our country, it's so hard to pick one person, but this person probably is one of the most influential to me when I think of American history. That is the person of George Washington. Now, there is some historians who will talk about George Washington as being some kind of incompetent person who really, just because he was tall, he was popular. But I think the dynamic leadership of George Washington is much more than this. I think we would probably pale in comparison, most of our leaders especially would pale in comparison to what George Washington was. The leaders we have today, Washington would probably despise, and he would probably hate them, just to be honest with you, from what I've studied and what I read about Washington. But here's something I want you to consider. See, we live in America today that probably, I think, has the best military in the world. We have the best economic system in the world. Quite frankly, we live pretty good in our country, thanks to the blessings of God and our forefathers. So, we can't exactly put ourselves with the perspective of Washington, but let's just try for a moment. On June 14th, 1775, the Continental Army of the United States was officially formed. General George Washington was appointed commander-in-chief over this army. Now, Washington's job was to take this ragtag bunch of farmers. Some of them may have been military people, but most of them were poorly armed volunteers, and lead them into battle against the most sophisticated, well-trained army in the world. An army that George Washington knew because he had been part of being in the British military previously. So Washington's challenge was to take the B team or the C team or maybe even the 6th grade team and challenge the varsity or collegiate level. It was not an easy challenge. But what shows in Washington's character that he was not just some incompetent person is that he took that army through some of the most dire times in our country's history. Times when they didn't have shoes, they were freezing, they didn't have much food, everything looked pretty bad and pretty bleak from time to time. He took that army, and as a leader, he accepted that challenge. He was encouraged, and he encouraged his men. And by pressing forward, they fought for the freedom that you and I enjoy today. That small ragtag army of poorly armed volunteers, of farmers and tradesmen, took on the best military force in the world. And by taking on that best military force in the world, they won our independence. See, it just amazes me that God has blessed our country so much. The divine stories of what David faced with Goliath, the divine stories of what Washington faced with the British Army, those stories can still be applicable to us today. A lot of times we think that's just history and that's in the past, but it's applicable today in our life. Because, my friends, I'm telling you, there's not a challenge that you are not going to face that God has not already laid the pathway for you to overcome that challenge if it's His will. So be encouraged. Rise to the challenge that's before you and take that fight to the challenge. I hope that you got something out of the Faith Friday. I hope that you're learning something. I hope that you feel encouraged. Always feel free to